Hello there. I am Tyler Thurman with Tyler Thurman Coaching, a professional transformative coach, and I'm here with my co-host, friend, and colleague, Harold Feddersen.
Hi, Tyler. Very happy to be with you.
Hello. This is our first live Google Hangout, so I'm excited to be here with you. And we're going to have a conversation today about the topic that you selected, the myth of self-improvement. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you had in mind with that topic?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics because, as you know, obviously, the industry of self-improvement is ginormous. There is a whole huge industry based on the idea that we can improve ourselves, that we can become better people, more spiritual, more something or other, whatever that is. And the whole foundation of self-improvement is completely a myth because once we get deep enough into sort of the truth of what we are, we
Hmm.
start seeing there actually is nothing to improve upon. It's more of a revealing than a fixing or a making better.
Nice, nice. I totally echo that sentiment. Uh, one of my mentors referred to it as an excavation endeavor rather than a manufacturing endeavor. So it's kind of like we're it's more of a, as far as what's valuable when it comes to the self, if you will, uncovering it as opposed to attempting to improve it. But why don't you tell us a little bit more, just about the self improvement movement in general and kind of what all it encompasses?
Well, I like what you just said there, that it's more of an excavation instead of a manufacturing, because that's kind of the idea. Is I need the general notion is I need to become this, or I should be more of that. And there's this idea that just there's this notion that what you are is not good enough, and you have to somehow change in some way through some sort of a system, usually a 10-step, 6-step process.
That's right.
And then you'll be better. You'll be improved. There will be a new version of you. Um, but it that's not so true. There's like this. It's almost like this false layer, through these steps of becoming something else, as opposed to just becoming more aware of what exists prior to the notion of self-improvement. So you
Yeah.
and I, we both kind of agree and see the people of this world, including ourselves, as I don't know what the word, that we see the essence of people, and we see the perfection of what they are or who they are. And then generally the work that we do is to support them in seeing it and then bringing that forward in the world,
Hmm.
which is completely once you see, it's like one of the conversations I had with a client just recently was about like one of my favorite analogies is we're like light bulbs with layers of clothing or blankets on top of the light, and as we slowly peel those blankets away, we start to see more and more of the light, and the light starts to shine more in the world, and more of the beauty and natural divinity of the human shows up. And we would never say, oh, that light needs to be more brighter or something, or it needs to be more yellow, or that we should really get a different colored light.
Yeah.
Once it's like, who would complain about the light from the sun? Um, there's nothing to improve upon.
It's
So it's
not
a
golden enough for me.
yeah. Exactly. I think it should be slightly more golden.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So I thought we could talk because the self, the self-help, self-improvement, you probably lump those both in together, but it's essentially a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world, and I think it's interesting because you'd think, as big an industry as it is, and as many people that participate, we'd all be superhumans in some way if it worked, right? If it worked the way that it was supposed to, if all those
absolutely.
10-step processes, got you to be this somehow this elevated type of person of of an elevated stature, and with abilities far greater than your average person. Um, and so I just think there's books, there's audios, there's seminars you can go to, you can go to 2-week retreats, you can
Yeah,
get certified in you know um, positive psychology and neurolinguistic programming and spiritual counseling, and all sorts of different things. And um, it still seems to me most people I meet are uh, they still struggle just like everybody else. So what gives? That's my question to you.
why aren't we all superhumans by now?
Yeah, and we touched on it a little bit obviously already. I just kind of wanted to go back to the movement itself, and then go from there. Um, but some things, it's obviously a huge industry. There's tons of people contributing, and I'm definitely not going to say that it's all bad or it's wrong or any way to participate. Um, there just seems to be something missing in a lot of it. Probably not all of it, but at least a good portion of programs you can participate in, coaches you can work with, any sort of practitioner, um, all of those things. There seems to be something uh, that a missing ingredient, if you will. And so,
Yeah. Well, for me, it seems like the fundamental difference between what you and I do and this whole self-help or self-improvement movement is the fundamental perspective. The absolute foundation of the self-help movement and self-improvement movement is that there's something wrong with you that needs to be fixed or changed.
hmm,
And I think the way you and I look at it is there's actually nothing needs to change. If you
right,
can see the if you can see the perfection, um, just as everything is, that's where we start. I remember when a mentor coach once said to me, you can't create a perfect future from an imperfect present. And I loved that
hmm,
because it's so true. And that's the foundation of the whole self-improvement, self-help movement, is that we're going to create a perfect future, even though we're not perfect right now.
right, right. But through all sorts of different means, right? Through mind programming and affirmations and positive thinking, behavioral modification, you name it.
Diets, shopping,
Yeah, yeah, and none of it seemed. I've certainly participated in plenty of those,
as
and,
have I,
and
as
I'm
you can see
guessing
from the library behind me.
that's right. Yeah, you and I are got our self-help junkie libraries.
Because yeah, for so long I thought that was the avenue. And like you said, it's not all bad, and of course it's not bad at all. It's just a way of looking at things. I think fundamentally the goal, there's a curiosity beneath the belief that something's wrong,
Mhm.
that lives, that brings us towards what really is what this is all about, is self-awareness. You know,
Absolutely.
I saw this picture on Facebook the other day. It said, "I didn't change. I just woke up."
Nice. Yeah.
And that's kind of the process. It's just becoming more aware, and then more aware. You know, being able to see, being able to see something more true, you know, now than we did before, and
Right.
it's like this continuously unfolding, or this continuous awakening, this continuous, someone's slowly turning the light up, or we're slowly turning the light up, and it just keeps getting brighter and brighter. And
Right. I love what you said there about the curiosity that lives underneath it, because that is absolutely been my experience with participating in the self improvement movement, because that's basically where I started, in the long road to becoming a transformative coach and a spiritual teacher. Uh, it it was with things like The Secret and positive thinking and law of attraction and affirmations and neurolinguistic programming. So I started way back there, but it set me on a path that was as in retrospect it was driven by a kind of it was that curiosity, but it was also there's there's got to be more to life than my miserable thinking, and or my insecurities, right? Which was
mhm,
kind of what front and center at that time in my life. Um, and so while the foundation of the movement does seem to be based in a bit of a misunderstanding about the self, it certainly helped me to get to where I am, not by actually completing all the 10-step processes, but by pointing me in a direction, um, that I just kept getting pointed in different directions, and and it it slowly transformed from a manufacturing operation to an excavation endeavor, where I'm like, hang on a second, there's nothing I need to add on to this self that I think I am. It's it's just kind of you stumble across some teachings here and there that say, look within and see what's buried under all the crap.
mhm,
And we see anybody that I've seen look, um, genuinely look, sees that there's more to us than we previously thought. There's something certainly more beautiful to us than we were previously aware. Um, but it's but I can't speak to this per se, but I don't think I would have gotten to the point of understanding that it, it's a self exploration more than a self improvement without the self improvement movement, if that makes sense. I don't think I would have gotten to this point in my understanding without it, even if the movement itself I'm not um, a contributor to in the way that a lot of other people are.
yeah, I think one of the common themes is there's a willingness to look. There's not always a willingness to see what's there, because once we start seeing, you know, you can see the absolute majesty of what you are. Um, but at the same time, you'll also see sort of the operating system that has been running the show, so to speak,
Right.
as well. And there's there's the willingness to see that, and I think that comes on the coattails of the curiosity. I think even beneath the curiosity, there's just this almost sense that something is slightly out of alignment. Um, and I think that's sort of the origin of the whole movement into whether it's spirituality or
Right.
self-improvement, self-help, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think it can present itself as like a calling home almost. So that it's
Hmm.
not like something's horribly wrong, but just kind of a I'm not quite in touch with that essential self. Um, it does seem to be always calling to us. Is that whether or not we're listening is another thing entirely. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting thing.
I was talking to some people the other day. We were talking about meditation, and they were asking me, like, what's the point, so to speak, of meditation? And I said, for me, I think for me and other people, I think one of the beautiful things about meditation is it gives us a space, however large, to hear the quieter voices that can't be heard when there's so much noise. And that's like what you were just speaking to. There's almost like a calling from somewhere within us, to move out of the way that we've been doing this thing we call life for
Mm.
however long. For some of us, it's been decades. Um,
Yeah, yeah, no, and that brings me to the next kind of direction I'd love to take us in, which is there. So, if self-improvement isn't the answer, it does still speak to um, let's call it a false self, as is what it's called in some circles, right there. It speaks to because if you looked around the world and were really honest, about um, how people first presented themselves with behaviors and language patterns, and I don't think we would call them perfect, right? We wouldn't call like, oh, what how they're behaving is beautiful and lovely. Um, of course, there's something underneath that, right, which we were kind of just pointing towards. But there also does seem to be this other thing, which which I guess calls into exploration the self part of the self improvement, the myth of self improvement, right? Because it kind of leads us down the road of, well, there's something that's not quite authentic here. Um, and then there's something that's more essential. Uh, uh, but but there's but it's not just all hunky dory, is it?
Yes, I kind of think it is, um, because it does exist. It's we have those, the two selves, if you will, right? The divine self and the sort of human self. To some degree, those two do exist exclusively, but they also coexist, and they um, exist independently without the other.
Hmm.
Um, but I like to look at it like, it's part of this thing. It's part of the reality right now, and if the sort of self, um, the small self, if you will, I guess. If
There you go.
that's where we're operating from, then that's where our truth begins.
Hmm.
You know, what about that? What about that? I always refer to it as an operating system. What about that operating system is true?
Hmm.
You
And
know,
at the very least, it's true for us, right? Even if it's not.
because what was true for me when I was 20 is not necessarily true for me now. However, there's also still something that was true for me when I was 20 that is still true now, 2 decades
Yeah,
later.
I like that because I think that continuity points to that more essential self.
Yeah.
Um, and I like the way that you spoke about it because about both, because I think it's really easy to demonize the part of ourself that we're not a big fan of.
And that is what the self-improvement or self-help movement is about. It's about fixing or healing or doing something about that demon self, right?
Exactly.
And we even refer to it as a false self, or we have all sorts of different ways of labeling it. But since it is in existence in our current reality, then it is there is a truth to it. And I always like to just stick with our experience because it's really easy to get into theoreticals and into
Right.
conversations about beliefs and things. So just sticking with our experience, if it is in our experience currently, then it's currently real for us. Um, the way I operated in my life, say 10 or 15 years ago, was very true at that time. Um, and as I continued to go deeper, sort of within, and be more willing to see what is true, some of that um, just sort of falls away on its own.
Mm, right. Yeah. And you and I know we've talked about this before, so that's how
we've,
I that's how I know this. But there,
we've had a couple conversations in this
that,
arena.
that's right, and that's why we're doing this so that more people can be flies on the wall to these conversations. Um, but there also seems to be some kind of, and maybe this is that more essential part of ourselves, but there seems to be kind of an observer um, that once we access or understand more, or we're more aware of um, the observer part of ourselves, there's something really beautiful can happen with all range of human experiences that we have, um, which is they kind of become neutral, right? So as opposed to, because in order for us to have self-help or self-improvement, the very uh, terminology implies good and bad and right and wrong. There's good emotion, there's bad emotion, there's good behavior, there's bad behavior, um, and there's something about a deeper understanding about the human experience that allows all of it to be um, okay, I guess. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and yeah, and so there's it it takes the, because that's kind of one of the ways that we think about ourselves, right? Is just the range of human emotions and thinking that we have, and there's parts about it that we've been taught aren't okay. I'm guessing for most of the people out there listening, there's some kind of range of human emotion or human experience that for you think of as taboo. It could be depression, it could be grief, it could be, as guys, right? Showing sadness or even compassion, right? It's not manly,
Yeah.
there's all
No,
these
we're
things that, so there's like the human experience that we have that we might call self, and then there's like a meta experience of that, um, where we get to judge that or not. And there's something about accessing that observer part of ourselves that allows it to just be. And I wonder if you could speak about your experience with that.
Yeah, listening to you talk about it reminds me of the teachings of Nisargadatta, a great Indian teacher, and um, he always would have us ask the question, who is that is um, who wants that, or it's a question that I've been asking myself for a while now, is who is actually driving this conversation? Especially when it comes to sort of selfish things. It's like who wants that? Where's that actually coming from? And as we enter into the sort of curious space of that, we start finding there's like an emptiness, like the question who is asking this, or who is desiring this, or who wants to be in control of the situation. It's like the question is a door, and then you open the door and you're like, wow, what am I going to enter into? And then you walk into it, and it's my experience that the more often I walk into that, who wants to be in control of the situation, who is feeling unloved in this moment, who is feeling like they're doing the loving. uh, when I enter into that room, more and more often, I'm finding there's actually no one in the room. The room is actually empty. Um, so then, it becomes a curious question about, well, what is that? Where is that question arising from? And you just start seeing this. I think I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this Adyashanti, who has this saying that the ego is nothing more than a circular pattern of thinking.
Right.
Um, and so that's what you start to notice. Like when you open the door with the question opens the door, you walk in and there's this emptiness. It's like, well, how did I get here? Because there's this cyclical thing that just keeps bringing us back again and again to these ideas of separation or control or
Right.
whatever it is that we're in the midst of.
Yeah, one of the, as you say that, one of the words that comes to mind is illusion. Is and you mentioned the word ego too. I won't get started too much on the ego because we could be here a while if
we
I did.
we could use the entire 8 hours of Google Hangout for talking about the ego, eh?
That's right. So I won't get into that too much now, but um, it's hard not to bring that up in the conversation of self, because or at least false self or illusory self. Um, and there's as you talk about sort of circular thinking, um, that is what I've found for myself and working with people. The more you explore some of the what once appeared as very rational lines of thinking, as you kind of explore them, shed a little light on them, maybe. And that's sometimes what we do really well as coaches and teachers. Um, is you kind of you flip the light on in the room, and like you said, there's nothing actually there. It was just this line of thinking about ourself, or or something else, um, that maybe we just been thinking that line of thinking for a really long time.
Yeah,
And so it seemed solid, right? It seemed, because we never really checked it out. And so we said, one of the common examples I'll give is, I used to think of myself as a shy person, right? And and I think I started that from about the age of 5, right? I just started telling myself that. Oh, and I think maybe other people told me that as well, and I bought into it. And I'm like, oh yeah, but it was really just a set of conditions and experiences that I started to tell myself, oh well, that's me. And so then I would invest in it, and I've started to believe it, and so you act into those beliefs. But if you look at it, you say, well, like you said, well, who's shy? Right? And what is shy? It's really comes down to some insecure thinking, which we all have. And so um, and the more I looked at it, the more I saw that, well, that's just completely made up. That's a construct of thinking, but it wasn't based in anything true.
Hmm.
It made it first start out as a descriptive thing, right? Well, it's a convenient descriptor for a set of behaviors, if you will. Um, and it turned into this self concept, this thing that I related to as part of me, but it really wasn't. It was this thing that was manufactured, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
without me. And then I forgot that I manufactured it because I didn't really know anything about how that process worked. And so, but once I was a little more able to look at that objectively, I could see, well, that's just kind of a bunch of hooey. And so it kind of speaks to, and that's just a tiny part of uh, you know what I used to consider my self concept. Um, but it's like, if that's not true, or that's not real, for lack of a better term, um, maybe none of that other stuff is either. And so then everything starts to break down a little bit, and it gives us room to um, ex- one of two things, I think: either create something else in its place without really knowing it, which is kind of what self-improvement tries to do, or it just tries to build on top of what's already there, or it creates a space to look and see if there was anything underneath that. And then we get to keep doing that as excavators or explorers. And I think it's really interesting because it was a big epiphany for me, and it had made a big difference in my experience of life as I began to see, wow, a whole lot of the me that I thought I was isn't as solid as I thought it was. It's is much more made up, which I think speaks to the illusory nature of at least the self that most of us is aware of most of the time.
Hmm. And I love, from a self-help perspective, you would then work to improve your shyness and become more outgoing. And your measure would be, well, now I'm more outgoing. I'm no longer shy. I am improved. Check.
Right.
Let me write an Amazon review on this guy's book.
Whereas, yeah, I like how you said that. Whereas now, the difference for me would be, sometimes I behave in ways that other people might call shy, and sometimes I don't. But none of
Hmm.
that means anything significant about me.
Absolutely. Because as you said, which is my experience as well, the whole thing's just made up.
It's a house of cards, if you will,
Hmm.
that can come tumbling down fairly easily once we look. And like you said, and which I very much agree with and like, is that there's a willingness that does seem to um, need to be there, at least in part. A willingness to at least look and say, and that is something that the self improvement, self help movements give us, is the very beginnings of that willingness to at least say, maybe it's not out there, maybe it's in here. And then there's a whole slew of different directions you can go from there. Which
Yeah.
some can really screw you up, and others can be really um, beautiful explorations, and quite helpful.
And I'd like to go back to something you said there because I think
Sure.
it's really valuable for people to really get this. So there's a pattern of thinking. So for you, it was a pattern of thinking of being shy. I am shy. And then once that belief structure, once those words kept being repeated again and again until they became a belief, then your actions started to flow from that structure of belief. And I think that's the thing. It's twofold. One, it's great to see how, it begins with a sort of sticky and repetitive belief system or thought system. But I think also for people, if you want to become more aware, just look at what you're doing, because what you're doing is completely reflecting all of the beliefs and thoughts you have, because
Right.
our actions are simply just a reflection of what's
Totally.
going on in our minds, just like
Yeah.
our emotions are a wonderful reflection point for the types of interpretations we're making.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why, because you're speaking to the cause effect relationship of, um, you know, mind to thinking to actions, right? It's it's a reflection, absolutely, like you said, and it also speaks to why behavior modification doesn't work as a long-term strategy, because you're trying to intervene at the level of effect,
Yeah.
too far downstream, essentially. So you can do it. You'll do it as long as you're consciously efforting it, but that's about it.
You're standing in the. Oh,
Unless
sorry.
I was just gonna say, unless there's a change of mind.
Yeah. It's like standing in the ocean and trying to change the headwaters of the
That's
river
right.
that's feeding the ocean. Yeah.
You shall not pass. Oh no, that's my nerdiness coming out. My Lord of the Rings nerdiness. So, now kind of bring us back around to we touched on, a few different, I think, helpful things. What is self-help, self-improvement to start with. We looked at the self itself, you know, and kind of the where the self-improvement movement tends to go wrong. Um, but take us in a different direction, if you could, as far as, um, if there's not much to it in both of our experience, I don't think, but if someone wants to get pointed in a different direction, um, maybe a more helpful direction than self-improvement, improving a self that's not really there. um, where do we go? What do we do?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, and I think we've touched on them actually. One is you need to have a willingness to see the truth.
So that curiosity you were speaking to in the beginning.
Well, yeah, I see it as there's a willingness, which is almost like a movement or a drive or a will, if you will.
Okay.
And then from there, we want to enter into the space of curiosity, because curiosity will take us as far as we're willing to go. Um, because our curiosity is the one that really questions everything. Is it true that I'm shy? Is it true that I'm uh, lazy? Or is it true that I am unloving? Or is it true that I am mean? Or whatever is going on in our heads, the curiosity is the one that's willing to look at that. But before our curiosity can go into effect, I think we do have to be willing. We have to be willing to enter into that conversation, if you will. And it's an ongoing conversation. One of my favorite things is, I say this to clients all the time and people all over the place. I say, we're not light switches. You don't just flick it on and there it is. It's constantly going back to the same things. It's a very cyclical um, movement, I guess, is the best way to
Yeah,
say
kind of
it.
fluid. It's not black and white necessarily.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And as soon as you and that willingness, you don't have to manufacture that. It's very much innate in us. I mean, if you're listening to this conversation, you're already, there's something in you that's calling you, if you will, forward. So then it's just entering that space of curiosity, and we've all been in that space of curiosity. Um, but there are also, I remember having a conversation with someone about curiosity. So this person would ask me questions, but their questions always had a preordained idea of what my answer was going to be.
Hmm.
So it was almost like they were asking the question just to verify what they thought was true. And they would say, I'm curious. And then they would ask me this question. I'd say, you're actually, from over here, it doesn't sound like you're curious at all. It actually sounds like you're just looking to um, clarify or quantify what you already believe. And I
Yeah.
said, it's an interesting thing, because curiosity, true curiosity, is completely entering into an unknown space. You actually have absolutely no idea what will be in that space when you wander into it. So
Right.
it takes courage, um,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah. And
just oh, sorry.
no, I just wanted to poke in there and say that as in regards to curiosity, you don't need to manufacture the curiosity either, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, first of all, if you're listening to this conversation, it's probably already there. You're aware, you're aware of it. But and anybody, most people, even in the self-help, self-improvement world, are in that place. Um, but it's you know, if you're not there, if you're not in a place in your life where it appeals to you to explore who you are, then don't. Because it's probably not the right time. You don't need to force that.
Hmm.
But there almost certainly will come a time in everybody's life, and multiple times for a lot of us. um, which reminds me of one of my favorite Winston Churchill quotes, where he said something to the effect of, "Everybody in their life stumbles upon great truth, and most people just pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and move on as if nothing happened."
That's a good one. That is a very good one. Yeah.
So,
We.
so we all have that inside us because we're all of the same mind. We're from the same essential source. Um, so we've all got that drive, as we're speaking about it, as that pull or that will to come home to discover more of who we really are, and it will almost certainly present itself on and off throughout our lives. And so we don't need to worry about that. In other words, if you're not curious, don't worry about it. So uh, for those of us, that might be a good segue into kind of wrapping up our conversation. Um, uh, but is there anything else that is kind of on your mind that you want to add in before we?
Yeah, I think just on another note on curiosity, um, a way to sort of find out if you're in the curious space is there's just an aliveness to you. You just feel uh, alive because you're in this completely unknown space, and there's such your eyes are just wide open, kind of. Um,
Yeah.
for me, it's a very beautiful space to be in, because you don't have to have the answers. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not the sort of not the know-it-all owl. You don't have to be Owl in the Winnie the Pooh story. You know.
Oh, takes me back. Right, right. It's one of the ways I think about it. It's just kind of coming to mind is we can forge ahead without our past thoughts and ideas and beliefs and values, without those driving the bus forward. It's like we're kind of moving unencumbered in exploration. And in this case, it's exploration of self with a capital S, as the Course in Miracles would call it.
Mm.
So if any of you out there are curious about Harold and I, this conversation sparked your interest or your curiosity, and you're interested in contacting us or excuse me, or working with us, as we are practitioners of kind of a different kind of work. What do you have a name for it, Harold?
That's a funny one, right? The title. I just tell people I'm an ontological coach.
There you go. So I sometimes use the word transformative coach or um, uh, spiritual teacher. I don't always even use coach necessarily, but we're practitioners. We're people that have conversations with other people um, that make a difference. In a kind of a deep, meaningful way, as opposed to more of a kind of a superficial, behavior-oriented fashion, the good old-fashioned type of behavior modification stuff. And we're not therapists or psychologists necessarily either. We're delving more into, for lack of a better term, kind of the spiritual territory, but spiritual territory that makes a difference in our day-to-day lives. Um, and so, if you're interested in getting in touch with us, Harold, I know you're working on some of your website, your Facebook page, your YouTube page, all that stuff. Is there
Yeah,
anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I've torn down all the old stuff, and we're rebuilding.
So
We're
they're in the
rebuilding.
rebuilding process. So
Yep.
I'll give out my information, and if anyone wants to get in touch with Harold, just get in contact with me, and I'll put you in touch with him for the time being, until he gets his stuff up and running. So you can find me, Tyler Thurman, at coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com, and that's kind of my online playground. Find free videos like this one. Um, uh, Articles and links to Facebook page, YouTube, all that good stuff. Um, so, without further ado, any last parting shots, Harold, before we sign off?
Um, no, I guess I could give my email because that is my coaching email. It is haroldfeddersen@gmail.com. So that's HAROLDFEDDERSEN @gmail.com.
Fantastic. And for any of you who were tuning in, thanks for bearing with us on our very first um, live adventure here with Harold and I. There will be more to come, so stay tuned. And with all the love in the world, we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you, Harold.